Hey guys, this is Lucid. We're going to be doing the national overview for middle-aged Atlantis. This is a nation that I rolled randomly. Some of you probably, or most of you probably missed the announcement video, but basically I had my Patreon subscribers suggest nations, and then I rolled a dice to see which one of their suggestions I would play in terms of which nation they suggested. And this game is actually going to be a very large game. We're playing on cartographic revision. And I believe we have 20 nations, so it's not quite all of the middle-aged nations, but it's a lot of them. And yeah, it's also open to all skill levels, whereas normally I post my games for advanced players. So this game is open for everybody, and that was kind of had to do with the handicap of me just getting some random nation. But I also encouraged other people who maybe have more experience to not try one of the super strong kind of meme nations, but obviously the newer players could pick whoever they wanted to. So anyway, I hope we have a fun game. It's going to be also kind of interesting because we're playing on cartographic revision, which generally will have a kind of cramped map. In other words, not too many provinces per player. And the way it builds the map, expansion is often a little slow because it intentionally puts barriers that slow expansion down. So anyway, it ends up with a very cramped feeling map. Yeah, so the other thing that's going to be interesting is we have a lot of underwater nations. We'll go through that we'll go through that now. Well, okay, I don't have it pulled up. We'll go through that, I think, in the first episode. But there's a lot. There's Pelagia, which is really, really strong underwater, and Ryla, which is really strong underwater, or which is really strong in general. I think one of the stronger nations in the game, if in experienced hands. It's not brokenly powerful, but it's very, very strong. And then we have Yis as well, and then we have some water-capable nations like Shinuyama and maybe a couple more. I think there might be one more aquatic nation. So anyway, it's not going to be a boring game. We have a lot of underwater nations, so there will be a lot of fun. Atlantis, if we look at it, it's a very weird nation. It doesn't have, like, late-age Atlantis has some pretty excellent troops. In general, we don't really have great troops. We're going to go through and talk about it all. But the short summary of the troops is we have Atlanteans and Shamblers, and Lobster Riders, who are Tramplers. We have one Cap-only Sacred, who's okay. But in general, our troops are kind of subpar. Our Cap-only Sacred is not really good, I don't think. Not really good enough to take a heavy bless. And we don't really have other ways to capitalize, I don't think, on our bless, though potentially we could. We started this game over Christmas, so I didn't really have a ton of time to strategize. But so anyway, we'll go through the troops. So for the Atlanteans, we have this guy, the Militia, which just has a coral spear. You can crank a ton of these guys out, but basically they're crap. Same version with armor, but takes a lot more recruitment points and resources. This guy has a shield, but no armor, so does not take many resources, takes a fair amount of recruitment points. This guy, you can see, you can just mass these super fast. So if you want to like siege down a fort really quickly, these guys are not bad. They have decent siege strength. You can crap them out very quickly. Then we have the Atlantean infantry. These guys have a hat, chest armor, and then a shield. And they're not much more expensive than the other ones. So if you're going for Atlanteans, you probably are going to at least want to get these guys, unless you're just looking for siege chaff. Next, we have the Reef Warrior, which is interesting. These guys, now all the Atlanteans also are amphibious, so they can go on land, and they have dark vision. And then a lot of the ones with coral armor have poison barbs, which will poison things that that have very close range attacks. So anything like with a hoof, so cavalry will get poisoned, as will things with like a short sword or something. But if they have a spear, they probably aren't going to get poisoned. So anyway, it's not really that great, to be honest. It's okay. It really is all you can say. But these guys also, so they have the coral spear, coral curious. They don't have a hat, but they have Coral-tipped javelins. So they get 2 javelin tosses, which gets buffed with strength, and it does weak poison damage when it hits. So for land expansion, these guys are actually not bad. They throw their little coral javelins, and it hits, and they throw it twice, and then they come in and smack people with their spears. They do okay. And versus certain types of lineups, you may, like glamour type stuff, you may find this is good. Certainly is not bad as a second line of troops to kind of throw their javelin and then fill in the gaps in your front line as some of your front line units die. Then we have the Coral Guard. Here we have a better Coral Spear. You can see it does 14 damage, as opposed to like these guys who do 13. This guy who does 13. This guy who does 13. So this guy does 1 more damage, which is nice. It's significant, because each one more damage you do is going to be... Basically, the damage you're doing is the difference between your damage and their protection. And this is right at the cusp where you're barely going to be damaging them at all. So +1 is really nice, because that's also going to allow the poison to trigger. And then they have decent armor. Not horrible. But these guys are pretty solid now. Now we're talking about a fair amount of damage per square. 24 damage is a high damage attack. This is going to chop up a lot of stuff. And then they don't have a shield, but that's okay. So these guys are okay. 15 gold, and then if we compare it down here to like the Reef Warrior, 12 gold. So these guys are more expensive. But I would say decidedly worth it if you're going to be cranking out Atlanteans and you have the resources. Next we have the Shambler, who is notable for having 2 attacks, and then decent base protection without having any armor. Again, all the Shamblers I think are 50% dark vision. These guys are pretty good if you can throw a strength buff on them, but otherwise this is kind of at the threshold where you're not really... Like 2 attacks is nice, but you're barely going to be getting through armor on any decent units. Their morale also is not great at 11. Morale for Atlanteans is 13 for the top-end troops, and then 10 for the lower-end troops. So the Shamblers, I guess, are a little better morale. Next, we have the Shambler Guard, who have... Oh, one thing I didn't mention, if we go back to the Reef Warrior, these javelins only work on land. You can't throw them underwater, which is kind of odd. But that's how that works. Figured I should mention that. And the Coral Glaive Skin have poison. Okay. So the Shambler Guard, so we have armored Shamblers. So these guys have a turtle shell shield and shark skin armor, so they have decent protection, because they have good base natural protection, and then with the armor, it's actually okay. So, not bad. And the Coral Club hits pretty hard. But these are really, if you don't have enough resources for the better troop, which is either the War Shambler, and these guys are no slouches. Like, if we look at the normal Shambler, 20 gold, 1 resource, 25, and now by the time we get up to the War Shambler, we're 25 gold, 19 resources, 30 recruitment points. So significantly more expensive, but these guys hit pretty hard. Like, this is a high damage attack. And these guys are recruit anywhere, so you can mass them, and yeah, they're not bad. They're not bad. 6 head protection, 15 body protection, and a shield. You know, they're going to be solid. They're going to hold up okay to archer fire. And, I mean, they don't have a hat, which kind of sucks, but they have a shield, and they have decent natural protection. And they're going to hit, like, freight trains with this. Now, you may decide to recruit these guys who have no shield and a hat. So they're going to have a little higher head protection. So, I think it would depend. I think you'd actually have to test it, and I haven't really tested this nation enough to know which is going to be better. But these guys are going to hit harder, so if you're fighting really high armor, you probably want these guys. But if you're fighting things with a bit less armor, kind of like more normal troops, having more of these guys is probably going to be a little better. But when it comes to sieging things down, these guys are 1.4 strength, and then, these guys are 2.3. So, per gold, 25 versus 15. These guys are less than half the cost, but double the siege strength. So I think they're a little bit more siege efficient. Yeah. And the Shamblers are going to be kind of okay for expansion. They have a high enough hit pool base, or hit point base, that a lot of times they're going to be able to... to survive things like getting poisoned or, a hit or two and still survive, whereas your Atlanteans are basically going to die when they get hit. Nobody has poison resistance, which is kind of shitty because you kind of need that for expansion. Finally, we have... Okay, we're not finally, but we have the War Lobster. I'm going to come back to the Sacred in a minute. 50 gold, so significantly more expensive. Twice as expensive as a Shambler. Not great stats. Yeah. So, if the rider dies, the lobster will run around, and I'm pretty sure that if the... Okay, so A, the lobster can kill your own stuff, and B, it's going to kind of do random things, and C, I'm pretty sure the unit's dead if the rider dies. I don't think you replenish the rider, which kind of sucks, but such is life. They're also aquatic, whereas most of your stuff is amphibious, so they cannot leave the water. And yeah, if you have them in a lot, like in high numbers, they're actually pretty decent. So if I were fighting something like, trying to think, they have pretty high defense. Maybe Lobo Guard or something like that. I would consider massing lobsters. Maybe. I'm not sure. They kill things pretty quickly. If you have a ton of lobsters, you can kind of develop an overwhelming advantage and just run over some people. Or if you have them attacking a flank, they can be pretty good, but they tend to die, and they're really expensive. So in that way, they're kind of like elephants. And then we're going to do the Mother Guard now. So the Mother Guard, 40 gold. So notably, not that much more expensive than these guys, the War Shamblers. So if we compare them, the War Shambler is 13 protection, 11 attack, 13 defense, and 23 HP. These guys, higher HP, higher protection, and they have a shield. Their glaive, I think, does a little bit more damage, and they have better attack. So what, 11 attack on the glaive versus these guys with 10? Yeah. So these guys are definitely better. You'll probably want to crank these out of your capital if you have any kind of, even if you don't have a bliss. Because the bottom line is their upkeep is less. So these guys' upkeep is 16 a year versus these guys who are 20 a year. So you're saving some money on upkeep, which is not trivial. It'll take a while for it to pay for itself, if we're being completely honest. Like if you said they're the same unit, you're basically going to be saving 4 gold a year, which, it'll take 3 years to pay off, which isn't really practicable. But they're better units, so that's not really a fair comparison. I mean, these guys, 16 protection, and then a bit more HP. They're definitely going to be significantly more survivable. And then if you have anything at all kind of useful on your Bless, then that will be nice as well. Yeah, and they're bodyguards too, so if you get into some like relay and assassin business, then these guys are okay. Anyway, so this is the Mother Guard. Pretty useful. But I don't... Okay, now let's talk real quick about building a Bless around these guys. Why is it not a great strategy? A, you're cap only. B, none of these stats are awesome. I mean, if I'm looking at it, there's not many sources of fire damage underwater. You could consider taking something like Bark Skin, but you already have high base natural protection. So buffing that is kind of out. You could take something like Regen, and these guys would be pretty good, but they're not going to be phenomenal. If you went Regen Fortitude, you'd be able to expand with these guys pretty well. But then it's like you took Regen Fortitude just to make these guys able to expand. And they're not great. Like, they'll get crapped on by normal elite troops. So I don't see it. I really don't see using these guys. Now, there's some potential synergy with the Consort up here, which we can talk about. That maybe some of the more creative among you will figure out a good way to do this, but I didn't test it extensively, and I definitely didn't figure out a good way to do a Bless with these guys. Next, we have the Soldier of the Deep. We have a class of units, these mages up here and these guys here, who you can recruit from your coastal forts. And let's make sure that's right. Yeah, coastal forts. And these guys are basically horrible. They're worse than most of your indie stats. The only thing I can think of that makes them not completely horrible is the fact they're cheap to recruit, and they're poor amphibians. I'm out of reasons. Yeah, they're pretty bad. Yeah, don't have anything good to say about those guys. If you have something good to say about them, then tell me, because probably wherever I am in the game when I upload this video, I probably want to figure anything else out for them. Next, into the commanders. Now, this is where Atlantis starts to get interesting. We have a scout, nothing super important. Stealthy 50, which is kind of good, and then amphibious. Amphibious scouts are always nice. A shambler chieftain, 60 leadership, which is okay but not great. The consort, 80, the critical 80 leadership. He's sacred too, so he's going to be kind of lower on the upkeep. I think even a tiny bit lower than the shambler chief. Pretty decent gear. He's got this high damage coral glaive, and he's sacred. So if you did take a good bless, it is possible to thug these guys out and they can do light raiding. The problem I see is, okay, you've got high encumbrance, so they can't do heavy raiding unless you have like a reinvigoration bless. And then they're going to need a lot of gear to kill anything more than just very basic PD. So I'll be honest, I don't really see it. If you had reinvigoration and regen, and you came up with some clever gear to put on them, maybe like a vine shield, but by this point in time, the important thing about thugs, especially thugs like this, like if you're going to use a Holy One thug, is that you need to not put much gear on them. And these guys aren't really strong enough to do a lot of raiding without a lot of gear. I could be wrong, because I haven't tested it, but just intuition looking at the stats, I don't see it. Do not see it. Next we have the Coral Queen. This is a Recruit Anywhere Holy 3. There are not many mages that have Recruit Anywhere Holy 3s. In fact, I can't think of any off the top of my head. Not to say there aren't any, I'm sure there's another one, but I can't think of it. So that is kind of cool. What does this actually mean? Well, how preaching works in the game is the max level you can preach to is dependent on your priest level, and the amount, or the likelihood that temple checks generated are going to flow over into adjacent provinces is dependent on the current dominion in your province. So what does that mean? It means if you put these guys in forts and you have them preach, then you're almost always going to get up very close to your max dominion, even if you're on the edge of your kingdom. And then that is going to cause your dominion to likely overflow whenever possible into border provinces, which is really important if you're an aquatic nation because it's really hard to control dominion. So if you want to take good scales, this is pretty important. The other thing it means is these guys are actually decent mages effectively early in the game before you have much research. So having a few of these in an initial war that are all there spamming out smite can do a lot of damage. So yeah. Now, you're not going to need them really to bless your troops, because you're not going to have a lot of sacreds, I don't think. But, yeah, they're not bad. Also, they have high base natural protection. It's like they have bark skin already cast on them. So these guys are actually kind of more thuggable, too, in that you can do Holy Avenger and some other stuff. Their defense is kind of crap, but if you put good armor on them, they could probably kind of thug. Yeah. But I don't think that's how you would probably want to use them. But anyway, it's possible. If you need to do it in a pinch, you could. The other thing that Holy Threes are good for is calling back your god, because you potentially, let's say you have 6 or 7 of these towards the middle of the second year, so like turn 16. You can call back your god very quickly. And like, I think 10 of these could call your god back in one turn if that's the math. I think it's 30 points, but I could be wrong. Anyway, I mean, if you need to do it, you need to like do the math. But this does allow you to kind of use a god very aggressively. So kind of cool. Recruit Anywhere Holy 3. Next, we have this guy, and this guy is the centerpiece. Oh, no, not this guy. Okay, this guy's kind of just normal. Mage of the Deep, Water 2, he could be a Water 3, or he can have one of these randoms. This guy, if he's Astral 1, that's basically, to me, it says Communion Slave. Earth 1 is probably Lab Rat Forger. The Water 3s are going to be decent combat mages, especially underwater. The Fire 1, I think that might give you Acid Bolt. Let's see. Yeah, the Fire ones can do Acid Bolt and Acid Rain, which actually is not bad. The Fire ones, yeah, they can do, especially underwater. Oh, cannot be cast underwater. But you can throw a 5... you can throw a 5-gem bracelet on them, and the Fire ones can do Acid Rain. Which is a pretty solid spell. It's like Falling Frost or Falling Fires, but it's acid, which is pretty sick. So, anyway, pretty useful. Yeah, I could totally see recruiting a fair amount of these. 11 research points, which is okay, but not great. King of the Deep, though, this is a recruit anywhere high-level mage. Very rare to see these. So this is MA Atlantis is a kind of weird, interesting nation. And this is one of the main reasons. Everything I've gone through has been kind of mediocre. Okay, you get a Holy 3 Queen, or a Holy 3 Priest, kind of cool. This guy is kind of... he's really weird. And pretty strong. This is not normal. This is what makes this nation kind of funky. You get a 2 random of either Fire, Water, Earth, or Astral. Now, this opens up... all these are different, and you'll use each of these for different things. So, let's start with the obvious one. Water 5. So if you're Water 5 and you're underwater, you immediately go up to Water 6 with Water Power. If you put a bracelet on, which you should for 5 gems, you're now up to Water 7? Is that right? Yeah, Water 7 underwater with a 5-gem item? I mean, that's ridiculous. You have a recruit everywhere Water 7 mage. Let's go over what that means. That means you are going to be casting Falling Frost. You're going to be overcasting it by 4 underwater. Oh, cannot be cast underwater. Okay, so we'll go through... what can we cast underwater? Ice Strike, which is pretty sick. Scales area of effect. So you're going to be casting this with 4 overcast. So that is going to be... oh, I'm sorry, 5 overcast. So it's going to be 7 area of effect for 20 damage and basically 0 fatigue. I mean, it's going to be like 3 fatigue. You put 1 reinvigoration item on this guy and he can just spam this out. Oh, cannot be cast underwater. Okay, wait. You can see I haven't clearly thought about all this. What the hell can be cast underwater then? One second, I'm going to pause. Okay, so after looking, yeah, there's most of the evocation stuff doesn't really work underwater. Basically, what you have is Water Strike, which is okay. It becomes pretty long range, but it's going to be pretty inaccurate at a long range. And it ends up doing kind of okay damage underwater. You can cast it for basically no fatigue. So, I don't know, it's okay, not great. Doesn't really scale terribly well, so it's not something you're going to be looking to do underwater. Okay, what are the big things you can do underwater? The big things you can do underwater, which are going to be summon water elementals, which are obviously awesome underwater. They get a huge amount of regen. And then you have the nuclear option, which is Shark Attack, which is super good underwater. So casting that's all really good. Yeah. And we also have Monster Fish. We'll talk about that later. But anyway, that's a summon. For casting underwater, those are your big things. I could be missing out on some stuff. You have Prison of Sedena, which can only be cast underwater. It scales very, very well. So basically, you're going to lock people in a big block of ice, and they're going to take fatigue damage. and this is going to scale really well with your water dudes. So, super nice. Liquefy, I think you can cast this underwater pretty good. And then, yeah, anyway, that's the water ones. There's probably some stuff I'm missing. On land, though, you're going to be up to, with the Bracelet of Water, you're going to be up to Water 6, not Water 7. And that is where you start doing this, Falling Frost. So on land, your water dudes are going to be doing, you're going to be overcasting by 3. So that means it's going to be Area of Effect 8. And it's going to be doing 20 cold damage, which is going to almost be able to hurt undead who are cold immune. So very strong. And fatigue cost, this is going to get divided by 3. So it is going to be, 7 fatigue? So pretty ridiculous. Falling Frost is really, really good. So with just, I mean, if you factor in having no spellcasting encumbrance and having like Boots of the Messenger, where you're doing 3 reinvigoration, which is effectively going to take off like 3 fatigue from your 7 fatigue cast, you can cast it for like 20 turns before you even start fatiguing out. So, kind of ridiculous that with 2 5-gen items you can cast this like 20 times. The only problem with this is you don't really have great access to things that are frost resistant. So if you get undead, it kind of makes these guys better. Because they will be able... you'll be able to have a front line that will not be damaged by Falling Frost. Yeah, so this is kind of one of the main things you want to do with your water randoms of your... whatever the hell they're called. What the hell are they called? King of the Deep. So, yeah, so that's the water randoms. For the fire randoms, we'll do those next. Basically, the fire randoms have a few things they're going to do. One is they're going to make rune smashers for you, which are really hard to get. Fire water is a really rare cross path. It is something you don't see very often. It's one of the things I end up empowering a lot to get that cross path, because you get really important items like rune smashers are super important, and potentially being able to drop Acid Storm is ridiculous. This is one of the strongest spells in the game. It's one of those things which there's not really counters to. Acid Storm, we'll be able to cast this with just any water booster on one of the fire randoms. I mean, on one of the fire randoms. And basically the way this works is it's going to be doing armor-piercing damage that is non-typed. Like, it's not going to be typed to anything that can hit a resistance. So it's going to be doing armor-piercing damage, and then that damage can also make your armor go away. So if you drop, Army of Gold or something on yourself, or Army of Lead, you'll be much more resistant to Acid Storm than somebody without it. But basically this is probably one of the strongest battlefield enchantments. It's like significantly stronger than Firestorm. And what's nice is you actually we don't have very good things for our nation. Like, if we look at our troops, not super great, but, 25 is high base HP. That's the one stat that if you look at all these stats, what sticks out as being pretty good? We have a lot of hit points. So, if we throw on mass regeneration, we regenerate. No, we don't have nature access with this nation, but we regenerate 3 hit points a turn. So anyway, we potentially have a pretty solid front line to survive Acid Storm faster than the enemy. So that is how the fire randoms mostly get used. Mostly Rune Smashers and the acid stuff like Acid Rain and Acid Storm, and you can do all those. The Earth randoms, these are your thugs and coastal raiders. So if we take a look at their stats, these guys not super great. You could throw a shroud on them, but why throw a shroud on them? You could put good armor on them. If you maybe somebody Jedi's out a pretty good way to make this guy a thug with the shroud. I think it's probably not worth it, but I'm wrong about these things pretty often. Yeah, so what are we going to be able to do with an Earth 2? Well, okay, that's going to open us up to Earth Power, which is going to take care of a lot of our fatigue issues. It's going to open us up to Temper Flesh and Iron Skin, which, let's say we have a hat already, so let's say we throw a, Armor of the Knights on these guys. It's going to kick their body protection with their natural protection already at 10. Okay, well, it's going to jump up to 20. And then their body protection is going to be 23. So then this number will be pretty close to 30, low 30s. So they'll be at low 30s with only a 5 gem item. And then if they're underwater, water is awesome underwater. You can do all sorts of water buffs, we have Earth, so we'll do Temper Flesh, but with the water, we can do things like Quicken Self, Water Shield, Ice Shield, which are all really solid underwater. Yeah. So, this is just very, very good for thugging. You need some way to deal with chip damage, so either a Wraith Sword, or throw in a Ring of Regeneration, or you can do Hydra Skin Armor. All those will work. You don't really need to worry about... probably Summon Earth Power is enough to handle most of your reinvigoration, most of your fatigue issues for normal light thugging. So yeah, these guys are super, super solid coastal and underwater raiders. It's strong enough where if you jimmy around with it, if you put a regen item on them, and then I think these guys can also do the Amulet of Growth, which will kick them up to over 30 HP, what that will mean is you'll get basically 1 extra regen a turn. These guys are on the high end of thugs. Earth Water is a pretty good cross path. You have pretty high in those paths too, so you're not going to get a lot of fatigue from going through your buff up cycle. These guys can potentially kill player armies if you put a lot of gear on them and they don't have a ton of mage support, or the mage support is not well equipped to take this kind of guy out. And it's kind of early in the game. This guy is a super solid thug. And then finally, for the Astral randoms, these guys are your special forces. They are going to... You throw a Starshine Skull Cap on them, and then again some of the basic gear we discussed, and these guys are going to teleport in and mass raid, basically. And what this will look like is you're basically going to be doing the water buffs. So, Wraith Swords are actually pretty good on water mage, water thugs, because they can do Quicken Self. Yeah, so... if you're not worried about fighting undead so much. But yeah, these guys are pretty awesome. You can just teleport in, you have some basic minimal gear, and they can take 5 or 6 provinces on the first turn of war, or counter raid, or whatever you want to do. So these guys are super duper important. They are also some of your more reliable astral access. So yeah, just super good. Super good. If you throw Shade Mail on them, they basically can't be countered, except by people anticipating where you're going to do your teleport attacks. So, you don't have good death access on this nation. And then finally we have the Deep Seer. So we've covered all the King of the Deep variants. These guys are kind of the centerpiece of the nation, if you can't tell. The Deep Seers, they're fortune tellers, which is pretty sweet. And they are reliable astral access. They're our only reliable astral mage, and that every time we recruit them, we'll get astral. And they're pretty solid. There's not too much to say. The only thing that sucks is they're old, so you'll tend to lose some of them. Fortune teller's nice, so you can either go... Fortune teller's best if you go Misfortune, because it's going to block some of that stuff. But if you go Luck and Turmoil, it's also pretty good, because you're going to get so many more events total that even though the events you get are going to be better, in general, you'll get so many more events that the Fortune Teller is kind of nice then too, because it will trigger on the bad events. We also have Gift of Water Breathing, which means you can bring some dudes underwater. I'm sure this has some particularly valuable uses. I haven't really figured out what those are. But anyway. The other thing that's important to note is these guys are high research. Like 15 is pretty damn good, as is 15 here. So if you choose to go Drain, you probably want to recruit these guys as your workhorse mages rather than these lesser varieties. Because like going from 11 to 8 is a pretty big hit. Like basically the 3 as the 3 drain as a function of 8 is pretty big. It's almost like 40% or something like that of 8. But then the 3 as a function of 15 minus 3, which is 12, is significantly less. It's only like 25. So the drain hits you far less if you take these kind of higher path mages. Anyway. But that's the mages. Not sure if there's anything to say more about these guys. You're a nation that has good astral. Okay, there's one more thing. We can do Rune Smashers, so that means we're going to be able to mind hunt pretty well. We have reliable astral mages, which means we can do fun things like put Rune Smashers on them and have them mind hunt. We have to be a little careful because in Middle Age there's going to be the possibility of stealthy astral mages from like Relay. And Middle Age has a lot of astral nations, so mind hunting can be really good depending on who you're fighting. But that's definitely something we have in our kind of repertoire. Next we have Initiates of the Deep. These guys you can only get from coastal forts. They kind of suck. Except they are very good Frozen Heart spammers for the cost. I mean, they're just ridiculously cheap. If you go Magic Scales, these guys are really good researchers. If you go Drain Scales, these guys are pretty shit researchers, but unless you have some of the research boost items. So, yeah, these guys can be good. And then we have these guys who are also reliable Astral Mages. They're kind of expensive for Astral 1. They're also Fortune Tellers, which is nice, and they're Sacred, so reduced upkeep. So upkeep 66 a year compared to like these guys who are going to be ridiculous, 220 a year. But these guys are so much more valuable. I prefer increasing my power. Like if I have a good mage that's less research efficient, often I like getting them. Because I can kind of use them in a pinch to do crazy shit. So, anyway, but these guys are solid. Fortune Teller's nice. Yeah, I mean, you can throw these guys in a community. You have to be a little careful if you're worried about Magic Duel. But other than that, pretty good. Pretty good. So I think we've gone through all of the normal troops. We have one national troop we can get, which is basically the Monster Fish. Now, if we look at it, it's 10 gems to get one of these guys. And so at first you may be like, why would I want to spend 10 gems on one dude? And the reason is because these guys are freaking badass. Just look at him. Look how fat he is. Look, he's got a little dangler dob in front of him to lure you in before he eats you. Why would you not want to get one of these guys? There are some challenges with them. One is they're undisciplined. And that's going to kind of suck, because these guys are going to be really good when they're buffed up, and it's really hard to buff up undisciplined dudes. You basically have to do Jedi magic. Like, you have to know how far they're going to move by the time you cast your spell, and then it goes there. It used to be a little easier in Dominions 5, because they wouldn't move the first turn, and you could just get your first spell off, because the mages would go first, and then the troops would move. So, we're going to have to figure that out, because these guys are the shit. I want to use Earth Mages to put Iron Skin on them. I want to use Astral Mages to make them Body Ethereal. They have very good morale. They have this attack, so they have fear, which is awesome. They have a huge amount of HP. So this guy with Iron Skin and Ethereal is going to make people cry. Make them cry, I'm telling you. Throw quickness on them. Like, shit's gonna get very, very real. All you really need to do what I just said is, like, especially if you have the Initiates of the Deep, or like basically anybody, but you don't really want to be using these mages to buff those guys up. But if you have the Initiates of the Deep, like 2 of them, one of them does quickness, the other one does ethereal, and potentially if you're super duper Jedi, right? Like let's pretend this snake was one of the monster fish. And let's pretend these were both mages. Like, you could have it so that they're going to run forward and maybe, they're going to kind of like veer towards the middle, right? So this is going to be his path. He gets here, he gets Body Ethereal. He gets here, he gets Iron Warriors. If you're Super Jedi, you could even position them like this. And then have another one stationed behind, so they're just going to kind of run past all these as they get buffed up. That would be very Jedi-like. I'm not sure if I could do that. But if I could, it would be awesome. Undisciplined sucks. But why are they good? I haven't even talked about that. Is it just because they have a lot of HP and they have high morale? No, it's not. It's because they have this swallow attack. This is going to do... I don't fully know how this works. My understanding of this is that it's going to... First of all, it doesn't care about defense. It's just going to hit. When it hits, it's going to be doing 20 damage, or if they're smaller than them, which means they're not size 6, it's going to do 40 damage. So it's an AoE 1 40 damage attack. Did you hear me? AoE 1, not dodgeable by defense, gonna hit everybody in that square, 40 damage attack. Like, I mean, it's crippling. It's just so good. It's so good. So, I'm going to have to practice how to use these guys. I haven't actually used them in the game yet, but what I'm imagining is... I have, like, some group of guys here on hold and attack. These guys are going to run forward. They're going to go in the front and start eating people. And before they get fully surrounded, my army's going to come in. And yeah, it's going to be good. I think the main thing to get on them is Iron Skin. Yeah. I think Iron Skin, Body Ethereal I think is nice to have. But to do that, basically you need Alt 5 for Iron Warriors. So, Alt 5 would be pretty important, I think. Once I have Conjuration. I forget what they are. I think it's like Conjuration 5 or 6. Which is pretty high. Let me check. Okay, yeah, so it's Conjuration 6. Anyway, that's it. We've now covered the nation. They're tricky. It's kind of a scales nation that you don't want to get the troops, which, normally if you want to go scales with the nation, you want to get the troops and you want to get the mages. That's ideal. Here it's like, well, we kind of just want the mages. So what does that mean? It means we're going to go through like a very weird early game where we're trying to expand with scales, probably, maybe a pretender, until we get to the mid-game when our mages are going to shine. But we'll talk more about that in the next episode, which will be pretender design. Yeah. So, hope you are looking forward to that, because I have a kind of weird pretender I'm going to use, and I will see you then.